All right. Looks like we have everything up and running. And we're broadcasting. Hopefully you guys can hear me, see me. Whoops, need to get rid of the computer bag though. Kind of in the way. Much better now. All right, we're up and running. 2 people at least on there. If you guys can hear me and see me, please say something in the YouTube chat so that I know like I'm actually getting out there to the world. So I do that, I lose my chat. So we'll just stick with it this way. All right, Charles and Troy are here. And the numbers are growing exponentially. Got a few more on already. Awesome. Hear and see. That's a good thing. Douglas is here. Hopefully, I sound a little better than I did last week. Good evening, Douglas. To Douglas. Is that Douglas Sy? I'm not sure how that works. All right. Hey, Richard. Been a while. I know. I got to talk to Alex and we got to get him out here. We're getting there. You sound better than last week. Yes, it's going well. You know, I muscled my way through the class last week. We got to the end, and basically Saturday I didn't move, because it was just like, all right, rest, try and get my voice back for today. Going to be running around tomorrow, getting some stuff together, and then I head up to Connecticut because Friday I am doing a thing at Yale with the curator at the Yale Furniture Study. We're doing a discussion on William and Mary furniture, so it's going to be loads of fun. I'm not exactly sure if they're filming it. I know there's going to be a live audience. There are, I can't remember whether it's 8, 10, 12 people that are coming. And we're going to thanks, Skip. And we're going to be talking about the details of William and Mary furniture. So it's going to be loads of fun. If they film it, what I'm going to try and do is see if I can get access to it, and we'll put it out here on the YouTube channel to try and get it to all of you folks. All right, so I've got a couple of things that I just need to turn this screen around so that I can see what it's actually showing me. So welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. And tonight I'm following up on last week's episode, which was right tilt saws. This week I'm looking at my Powermatic 66, which is a left tilt saw. And we're going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of things here. I'm actually going to run the saw tonight because I can speak well enough that hopefully, in the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'm not losing my voice instantly. So we're going to run through a couple of things here real quick on this saw, and then I'm going to kick over to the hammer saw, which was the right tilt saw. And I'm going to show you one of the operations that I wanted to show you last week, but knew I couldn't get through it and still be able to talk over the saw and the dust collector and all the other things that are going on. So, And yes, Skip, it is the cleanest you guys have ever seen the Powermatic saw. You did a great job cleaning up in the class on Friday. So that helped out a lot. So I do appreciate that. So let's get started with the left tilt saw. And in the comments from last week, one of the comments that was made was from a fellow from England that said right tilt saws he thinks are a European thing, and because he's got a right tilt slider, and he can't see any reason why he'd ever want a left tilt saw. So, and if you go back to last week's episode, you'll see in there where I responded saying, hey, in the US, they made right and left tilt saws. In fact, Oliver used to make one that tilted in both directions a long time ago, back when Oliver was Oliver instead of a Chinese company. And I know what I forgot. I was supposed to bring my cover over here for running the raised panel on here. I'll get it when I need to, and we'll go from there. Or I'll throw the other fence on and we'll live with that. It's live woodworking, folks. Like I said before, not edited for your viewing pleasure, clearly. Right now I've got this tilted over at the angle I need to. I'm going to show you how I cut a raised panel on here and why I think it's better on this saw than the other saw. But if we start to look at the things that I looked at last week with the right tilt saw, you can now see that, and I'm going to switch cameras there. Let's see if I can remember which one I'm supposed to do there. Fauquier County is represented clearly. Let's see, I think it's this one. Nope, that's the other saw. Must be that one. There we go. So you can see I've got the blade tilted over at an angle. It is tilting to the left relative to the position that I'm standing in front of the saw. So I'm feeding in this direction. So the saw is tilting away from the fence, which in a lot of cases makes this a much safer fence for much safer saw for ripping material. What I think is the major problem, and I'm not really liking that camera angle, so I'm going to try and move the camera just slightly. Hopefully I don't disconnect it or anything. I'm going to move it over there. Hopefully that's a little better. So when I move the miter gauge into position here, you can see that the blade is tilting towards it. So on the right tilt saw, I didn't have a miter gauge, but I had a slider that had a miter gauge attached to it. If I move the slider forward, the blade was tilting away. So if I'm making cuts where I'm trying to get an angle on them, say I'm going to make a mitered box or something of that nature, clearly having the saw tilt away from your miter gauge means that I'm a whole lot more comfortable getting my hands closer to that where the blade is to keep the down pressure onto the material so that it doesn't lift and cause problems with the miter. Here I've got to back my hands off because if I'm up here, I'm just not comfortable being that close to the blade. So to me, that's all of the things with either right tilt or left tilt saws are normal operations. Just cross-cutting, straight ripping are pretty much identical. There's no real difference in the process, and there's certainly no difference in the safety measures that you can take when doing it. The problem comes in when you tilt the saw. Each saw creates a set of problems that make it difficult to operate the saw safely or as safe as possible in certain situations. So again, if this is tilting to my left over this way, What you're going to see is if my hands are close enough to keep the down pressure on this piece of wood, I'm really close to the cutting edge of that saw. If it was tilted away from me, I could get closer and the saw would then be leaning farther away. I can make a cut if you want, but it's just sliding it forward to make the cut and come back. If I'm ripping, if I was going to put a bevel along the edge of this board, and I'll switch that camera again. So we'll go back up there. So if I get rid of the miter gauge, and let's say I was going to try and bevel this for whatever reason, we're doing a corner cabinet or something where I've got the styles of the case coming around at 22.5 degrees. They've got to get cut. So I kick this over at the proper angle and I go to set up. Here on the left tilt saw, having the blade away from the fence, tilt away from the fence, I feel a whole lot safer getting in here with a shoe or a push stick or something of that nature, because I'm not really trapping the material. If you remember last week, with it being the other way, I talked about how if it's tilted the opposite direction, that material is trapped and pinched between the body of the blade, the table, and the fence. So the likelihood of a kickback is a whole lot more. Here, because this can actually lift up and get out of the way, it's not going to trap itself between three different surfaces and get kicked out. So this just makes the whole process of being able to rip that, even if it's something really small. If I were to come over and say I needed a piece that was 1/4 of an inch at the small side and come up to whatever that angle is on top, I can still get in here and make the rip cut without having any problems of the piece binding, or I'm going to cut, I'm not going to cut my shoe off, the push shoe off as I go through, basically eliminating the whole purpose of the push shoe, which is, to catch the edge and push the piece through. So to me, that's the primary difference between the right and left saws is on the right tilt saw, it's a whole lot easier to make miter cuts. Again, if you're going to wrap miter fold a box or something of that nature, having the thing tilt away from you makes it a lot safer and a lot easier to make the miter cuts on the ends of a board using the miter gauge. Conversely, having a left tilt saw, being able to make rip cuts is way easier on a left tilt saw. So in terms of if you're out there trying to figure out, well, I'm going to buy a new saw, do I buy a left tilt or a right tilt? A lot of it, you have to look at the type of work you do. How often are you ripping, how often are you ripping pieces on a bevel? If you're more cross-cutting bevels, and you can go for the right tilt, that's better. If you're doing a combination of things, I'd probably lean towards a left tilt more than a right tilt. But honestly, if you're going to go into a right tilt, you really ought to just step into the slider, because that makes things a whole lot simpler. And where that ripping cut comes in, if you have a slider, you can set up, like I said, simple jigs on the slide that would keep the piece parallel, and I can actually rip from the slider, stand off to the side as I'm operating the saw, and there's no chance of kickback. And even if something were to rattle and catch the blade, it's going out and you're off to the side. It's going out this way and I'm standing off to that side. So there's virtually no chance of you getting hit by whatever is coming out of the saw. So if I'm going to set up and do a raised panel, say, on the saw. I'm going to show you the difference between the two, and I'm trying to zoom in a little bit more on my close-up camera here so you can watch me set this up. You move the, Dean says he moves the miter gauge to the other side of the saw when he needs to make the bevel cuts on your left tilt saw. Yeah, that is certainly an option here. You know, I do have another miter gauge. I couldn't throw the miter gauge on this side. Now I'm leaning away. Definitely makes things a lot safer, and you can push down a lot more. I just think the vast majority of people are right-handed, and they function, they're just more used to working on the left side of the saw. When they start to work on the right side of the saw, things get kind of weird. You know, not from a safety standpoint. 90% of running a saw is what you're comfortable doing and making sure that you're paying attention and you've thought the process through, so that when you get into the cut, you know where your escape routes are so that your hands don't end up in the blade, and you have your body positioned properly so that you know that if something kicks out of there, you are not in the path of the wood at all. So I'm going to switch. I need a taller fence here, so I'm going to grab one. Like I said, I have a whole other jig that's supposed to fit on this saw with a much higher fence, but I forgot to. It's all the way on the other side of the shop. So if I switch my camera now, which I have not done yet. I said I was going to, but then I didn't. All right, this is my sacrificial fence. The first thing I did was I determined where the fielded area of my raised panel was going to be. And you can see I set my saw to about an 1/8 inch depth. And what you're seeing, I should have kept it backed up a little. Let me see if I can do it with the remote. Yeah, there we go. All right. So the first thing I did was, with the saw set at 90 degrees, I knew where I wanted my panel to come into. This one was about 1.5 inches. I set the depth about 1/8 of an inch because that's what I want that fillet to be along the fielded area. So I just ran the saw around on all 4 sides and created the cross, or the relief cuts. So what I need to do now, and I have it drawn here on one of the corners, is, and again, let's zoom in a little, see if we can see it. Okay, so I've got some blue pencil there. So I've connected the bottom of that 1/8 inch relief cut down to how wide I want my panel to be at the bottom. I took this angle and I tilted my saw over to that same angle. So the first thing I need to do, and you won't be able to see this, is I need to raise the blade up so that it falls inside of that little groove. And now that I have it laid out there, what I need to do is bring it over and line up my saw cut with my pencil line. And basically, it's going to be just as simple as, I'm going to back up just a little bit because I really can't see what's happening there. There we go. All right. So just like if I'm running a raised panel on the shaper or on the router table, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the end grain and come across in this direction, because that way if it tears out along the back edge, when I rotate over, it's going to remove any of that tear out in the process. Okay, and I'm going to keep working around on this saw. I'm going to work around clockwise. I'm going to keep rotating clockwise. So I'm going to turn it on and make this first cut. Again, you can see that the bottom, the narrowest part of that raised panel, is going to run right on my throat plate next to my saw, and everything should go along just fine. So I say should because it's real woodworking. You never know. So I'm going to keep my hands pretty low. And now I'm going to rotate and make the second cut. And we'll wait for the saw to come to a stop. And then we'll wait for the dust collector to come to a stop. And what you're going to see is I've got an absolutely perfect little raised panel there. The important part of that is that you saw as I cut those pieces off, they were hanging out here where they just sort of danced around beside the blade and aren't trapped inside here where they're going to bounce around and then get caught and come flying out. And it didn't matter whether it was the cross cut or it was the rip cut, had the same thing. The waste was hanging out on the side away from the fence, so definitely gave me a whole lot more safety. And when I operated the saw, which you couldn't see on the close-up shot, was I'm off to the side here, and I made my pass through, came back, rotated, made the second pass through, and I'm off to the left side of this blade. So if by some chance those things come out, my body is clear, 100% clear of the path of the material. So, but that should be the case no matter what you're doing. It's hard for people who are left-handed to operate any kind of table saw because the rip fences tend to be on the right side. So their natural position puts them on this side of the blade. And anytime you're pushing this way, you're not pushing up tight against the fence, you're pushing into the blade. Here, my natural tendency is to push away from my body into the fence, which is always the safest position to be in. So, you know, if you're like Dean putting the miter gauge over on this side, if you have a T-square style fence, you could certainly put the fence on the left side of the blade for 90% of your, if you're left-handed, for 90% of the time, and you can do all, you know, the bulk of your regular ripping from on the left side, so that your natural tendency is to push away from your body and into the fence, which would then be over on this side. But you can do that on a right tilt saw too. I mean, if I had a unisaw, which I think I started that about the guy from England saying that it was in America, they made left and right tilt saws. Powermatics, the Powermatic 66 and a lot of the early Powermatic saws, they were all left tilt saws. But the unisaw, early on, before they made that new model, right before they basically went out of business, sold off to a Chinese company, and then became crappy little tools that you find at one of the big box stores. You know, they were always right tilt saws for the unisaw. And we talked about it in the class last week after last week's episode, because those guys watched, and we talked about the fact that the right tilt, pardon me, getting a little dry, folks. Sorry. The right tilt saw means you can keep the base body smaller, because the motor is hung in this area instead of out here. If I back up on the wide shot, where I bring my detail camera online here, I'll zoom in and show you that on the 66, got to bring this up so I can see. Back up a little wider. All right. You should be able to see that there's this great big plastic housing hanging off the side here. So my motor is in that box. And when this saw tilts, it drops down towards the center of the base. So the motor is hanging this way and then drops. The more I tilt over the blade, the more that drops into the saw. So you can clearly see that the box is overhanging the side of the table, which in the end makes the footprint of whether I have the extension on this or not going out for the 50-inch rip. Even if I just had the main saw body, it adds, probably three inches or so to the width of the saw on the left side of the saw itself. So that's probably another advantage to a right tilt saw, is that the footprint's going to be a tiny bit more compact. All right, so let me see if nobody has any questions about that left tilt saw. I mean, basically, the primary differences are in how you cross cut and how you rip when it's tilted. If you don't have any quick questions, I'm going to switch over to the other table saw and the other camera, and I'm going to show you how I make these cuts for the raised panel on that saw, and you'll see the difference at that point, hopefully. So nobody's saying anything, so I'm moving over. All right, you can see I've got the other saw set up, and I'm just going to bring over my raised panel that I just cut. I set this up the same way. I took and I can't see what's going on there because I've got that screen turned around. All right. It was good for setting up the camera, but not so good for actually running it. So I raised the blade up until it fell right into the slot that I had created. Again, this is the one that I just cut on the 66. I can't obviously cut this way because it's going to cut off my piece. So I have my taller fence. It's got a rabbet on it, which makes this space in here considerably larger than, if I just went up against the regular fence. So I can see an immediate problem, which is going to cause me some trouble here. So I probably won't make this cut. I got no zero clearance on the left side of my blade there. So if I was going to do this, I would actually have to drop my blade down and then throw a piece of plywood on here to function as a zero clearance throat plate. I would probably double face tape it down, and then reset the height of my blade, and then run this. Clearly live woodworking, and it was something that I just threw the thing together right before I turned on the camera here because I wanted to try and get what I couldn't do last week in there. And obviously I didn't think it all the way through because I got nothing to hold on to here. As this cuts through, it's going to, at some point, I'm not going to have any surface back here to run on anything. I'm going to just drop down into that piece. And at that point, I'm just in lots of trouble. The only other option I've got, let's see, where are we set? Let's see if we can't 3 7/8. All right, so if I bring this back out and I reset my depth, here's what I'm going to do. So if I bring this back to the 3 7/8 mark, lock it down. I'm going to grab a couple of clamps and a scrap board, and we're going to create That looks like it'll do. And I will widen up the camera a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. There's always more than one way to skin a cat. Not that I skin cats. I don't, you know. So if I set my raised panel up right there where it goes, and I'm taking my strap board, it'd be nice if I had it turned around so the flat side of the strap board was against my raised panel. And I bring it down on top of my auxiliary fence here. There we go. Much better. Yeah, I'll edit that last part out and we'll be good. No, I'll leave it in there because this shows you, I mean, like I said, I can either create a zero clearance auxiliary table that sits on top, or I can turn around and add a fence to my raised panel. And now I can make that cut. So I can keep it here. Keep the pressure down low. And you can see it makes the cut pretty nicely. Going to have a hard time because this panel is a little low and my fence is kind of tall. So if I were to try and come back this way, I don't have a whole lot of room to clamp the fence on the top. So I won't make the second cut. All right, the dust collect. Oh, thank you. Can shut off now. So to me, the best part of this is I can keep a lot of pressure down low because that blade is fully buried in my material. The chances of me having a problem, I wasn't down in the area of the blade, but I was pretty close to it when I ran it. So that means I'm less likely to drift away from the fence at the bottom there. What you saw with that cut was that scrap piece ends up in this tiny little hole. And this is what I was talking about last week, is that's a pretty narrow channel. There's probably 3/8 of an inch, maybe almost a half an inch of space in there. So the chances of that thing shifting and binding are slim, but they're not none. And they're certainly greater than at the left tilt saw. Because the other one's floating free, and if it bounces in against, physics tells us it's going to hit this and come out this way before it comes back at me. Here, if this thing twists the wrong way in here and catches the back of the blade, it's going to grab and bind and throw everything out of there pretty rapidly and with a lot of noise and excitement. So it can be done at a right tilt saw. Not the worst thing in the world. Probably your safest bet to make raised panels is to get yourself a router bit and a router table and run it that way. I mean, just ultimately, it's just going to be a little bit safer than trying to use a right tilt saw in this configuration to cut it. There's still a greater chance of that waste material catching and binding than there was over at the other saw. So I'm going to head back over there so that I can actually, you can see me instead of seeing my hand bouncing around all the time. That's not what I need to hit. That would be the one. All right. Wow, you guys are a quiet bunch tonight. So we are at 8:35, which is about as long as I wanted to go. A little more. Something to keep me from losing my voice. So to me, I think I've gone through the basic safety concerns that I have with a left tilt and a right tilt saw. Again, if I'm looking at them and trying to make a decision on what I'm buying, if I can afford a slider, I'm going to the slider. If I can't afford a slider, it's a toss-up whether I go. I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards the left tilt saw if I can't afford to go with a slider. If I can do the slider, because I can do so many more operations from that slide, including almost all of my ripping, it just makes the total operation of the saw so much better than a stationary cast iron top. It's just a different way of working. And if that fellow from England is watching again, please post your thoughts. I mean, you said you had a slider and it's a right tilt saw. So again, it's just, there's so many more things you can do. You can taper from the slider, you can rip from the slider, you can obviously you can cross cut on a slider, but there's, like I said, it changes the way you work. You work, instead of working behind the saw like I am right now, I'm off on this side of it, working in this position, and I can clamp things to the slider and slide the slider with my hands nowhere near the blade. And if something were to come loose, there's nothing to drag these into the blade. So it all but eliminates the need for the saw stop. I mean, all the big slider companies, if you're buying a professional style saw, all the major ones, SEM, Felder, Altendorf, all of those guys have technology in their saws now that prevent human contact with the blade. And the problem is they're coming in on saws that are tens of thousands of dollars at this point, rather than saws that are basically what I would consider at the level for the avocational woodworker. And you've heard me, if you've seen me at the woodworking shows, you've heard me say this before. I call you guys avocational woodworkers because you aren't doing this for a living. When I use the word hobbyist, half of you get mad at me because that's an insult. And if I call you amateur, the other half get mad at me because they consider that an insult. So I call you avocational woodworkers because you're just doing it for the fun of it. You're not doing it as a vocation. Are there tenon style fixtures that can be used with the slider? Yeah, actually, I think I might have shown one last week. I made one that fits over the rip fence. I believe I showed it in the video last week. If not, I will try and throw it into next week, even though I'm going to get off of the table saw. I think we're going to do some finishing next week. Talk a little bit about brush finishes and things like that. But I made a fixture that fits over and wraps around the fence on the slider, on the rip fence on the slider, that I use as a tenon jig. I have a big tenon jig that fits on this saw. Again, this is sort of I like to call this a Bob Van Dykeism. Bob Van Dyke is a friend. He is a contributing editor to Fine Woodworking magazine, and he has a school in Connecticut at which I will be teaching at this weekend. This is the tenoning jig that he makes, and he made one for the shop here. He came and did. If you go to Fine Woodworking website, I believe his table saw jigs class is available on their website. It might be something you have to pay for. I have no clue. But the jig that I made for my slider does essentially the same thing as this. It just weighs 1/10 as much. This is really good for working on a box style rip fence like this. But yeah, you can do that. Yeah, that attaches to the slide. What does it attach? I've never seen anything that stands it up vertically and attaches to the slide to make a tenon. I'm sure if I thought about it for a little while, I could. But to be honest with you, I tend to even on this table saw, I tend to cut my tenons laying down flat. I'll throw the stack dado in here, and on the slider, I do the same thing. I have a stack dado that Felder makes that I have right here, and I'll throw it on the. I'll throw the other camera on real quick. Oh, swell. All right, we were looking at the. It's not in that position anymore, folks. All right, come on in here. We'll come in a little tighter. Try and get it on there. So this is the Felder stack dado, and it has carbide inserts like you would find on a spiral planer or joiner head, and they're mounted. I've got one mounted what would be vertically when the blade is in the saw, and one mounted horizontally here. So this one functions much like the nicker on a hand saw that skewers the fibers, and then this cutter actually functions as a raker and removes all the waste. So it's an awful, yeah. Bob says he prefers the. He says he prefers the nibble away method for tenons, and that's essentially what I do. You know, it. You know, I use the stack dado and I make multiple passes to get it. To me, the real reason that is a much better method than using a vertical jig like this, in order to get my setting right, I'm relying on my ability and the ability of the jig not to fall down into the miter gauge slot. I'm relying on my ability to fine tune my rip fence in order to get it, to get my setting perfect. If I have a stack dado in there, I have an already built-in fine-tuning adjustment. It's essentially that long threaded rod, that worm gear that raises and lowers the blade. So, you know, I can micro adjust that thing very easily. All right, so Troy wanted to know, can I discuss staining half blind pins and keeping it off the sides next week? Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that when we start talking about brushed finishes. Like I said, Bob said he prefers the nibble away method, and Douglas wants to know, do the manufacturers make zero clearance inserts for the slider saw you just used with the high fence? Yeah, so Felder sells for that saw. It's a hammer saw, but that's Felder's entry level. They do make a zero clearance insert for that. It comes through as a big blank, and I would have to run the blade up through it. I can also, I did a thing on the Shaper Origin a few weeks back. I could easily cut one of those out because they're relieved on the underside. I have a couple of them here, the inserts. So here, let me get rid of this, and I'll throw the other camera on one more time. All right. So this was a zero clearance insert that I set up with the stack dado, so that now I have a zero clearance for the stack. But you can see it's not only long and narrow and got rounded ends, but it's got these cutouts, little pockets in there for some of the adjusting mechanisms that are in the saw. So I could easily set up, I believe somebody on the Shaper Hub probably has this already scanned in, and I would just have to download it and set up with the Shaper Origin, and it would probably route the perimeter of this thing and the pockets. So yeah, you can do that. And Douglas also wants to know if it's possible that I could, in a future episode, could I show ripping from the slider? Absolutely. In fact, I can, one of the things that I was going to show you guys at some point is making tapered legs at the slider, which is ridiculously simple. Any tapered part. We did years ago. Pardon me. Tiny little bit of that cold still lingering. And as I get dry, I start to have to cough again. Sorry. But yeah, years ago, I did a class on a Wharton Escherick desk that had the sides of the desk were frame and panel, and the frames were the rails and stiles were all twisted or tapered, which tilted the panel in the center at an angle, and then the panel was made up of tapered segments. I think there might be a video on my Instagram showing some of that. You can dig through there and see if you can find it. But we did all the tapering at the slider, and it's so ridiculously easy. And that's definitely one of the things that I wanted to show you in the coming weeks was how to taper. So at that point, it'll be easy to show you. I'll just throw that into the mix and show you not only how to taper something, but also how to just do the ripping from the slider. And there are certain basic jigs that you can make or buy for the slider that allow you to do an awful lot of things that are much more difficult on a miter gauge or a sled or something like that. I mean, cutting really tiny pieces on the slider is also something that is ridiculously, cross-cutting things is ridiculously easy with a Fritz and Franz jig. So lots of stuff to cover in coming weeks. So I think we're there. We are now at 10 of 9, which is a little longer than I really want to go with these, but I'm happy to answer questions clearly. Hopefully I didn't repeat myself too much. So that's good for tonight. Hopefully nobody seems to be tossing up any more questions real quick. So I'm going to call it an evening. Thank you guys for watching and coming and supporting this aspect of what I'm doing here. Please head over to my website, check out all the classes. There's a lot of great stuff on there. If you want to take a class at some point, shoot me an email. Let me know what you'd like to make, and I'll see if I can build a class around it. My classes here are very small, 2-3 people. Last week we had 4, and that was a big class for us. So thanks for coming, and I will see you next Tuesday at 8 p.m. and we'll cover some brushing techniques with finishes, including what you do with those half-blind dovetails. So, all right, everybody have a good night. Thank you.